This is Korean live streamer Yoon-Ji-ah, an influencer with more than 300,000 followers and a young woman whose playful streams were watched by thousands of viewers at a time. Ji-ah had a way of making you feel like you were old friends. She was honest, down to earth, and very sincere. For these reasons, she resonated perfectly with her audience. However, on September the 11th, 2024, this streamer suddenly disappeared, and it happened at the very end of her live stream. What followed was a desperate search to try and find her. In fact, it uncovered a horrific story which was born from obsession, money, and a man's warped idea of love. And that's because, buried within her audience and hidden behind the username of Black Cat, a generous donator would turn out to be an obsessive loner. And the truth is, he didn't even see Yoon-Ji-ah as a person at all. Instead, he saw her as an investment, a possession, and a lifeline. The more that he convinced himself that she actually belonged to him, and when Ji-ah finally tried to pull away, well, let's just say that the situation escalated in the worst way imaginable. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're traveling to South Korea to look at the recent case of Yoon-Ji-ah. This is a story about parasocial relationships, obsession, enormous donations, and unfortunately also murder. And trust me, after watching this video, you will definitely see streaming in a very different way. Oh, by the way, did you know that I am actually a human, and so are the rest of my team? Apart from Nero, he is definitely a cat. Look, the main point I'm trying to make here is that none of us are AI, and so if you want to support the work that we do, please do consider subscribing. Thank you. And now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Yoon-Ji-ah. Welcome to Korea, folks, and there really is no other place quite like it. I'm talking about the South, obviously. I mean, I could be talking about the North, but that would be for a whole list of other reasons. For today, we're focusing on South Korea, a place where ancient palaces and neon skylines just effortlessly mesh together. Late-night markets are buzzing with food, apartments stretch out like dominoes into the horizon, and there's an endless fixation with technology. And let's be honest here, if cyberpunk ever really does become real, this absolutely will be ground zero. And on that note, I thought you folks might appreciate a small behind-the-scenes update, both personally and creatively. As many of you know, I moved to Australia a year ago, and the next step was always to buy my first home. And, well, what we're standing in right now is Coffeehouse Crime's brand new studio. For the last 3 or 4 weeks now, renovations have been non-stop here, with dust flying everywhere and using tools that I didn't even know existed. I have to say though, my team have been fantastic throughout all of this, so thank you guys. And one other thing that has really helped me throughout all of this chaos are my Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classics. Honestly, these things have been an absolute game changer. Now, many of you who regularly watch Coffeehouse Crime know that Raycon has sponsored us for a while now, including this video. And I have to say, they have yet again come through for me. For example, when I'm deep in work mode, the active noise cancellation shuts out the rest of the world around me, which helps me focus and get the task done. And when tradies are in the house, all I have to do is hold down this button to change to awareness mode, and now I can hear both them and my music at the same time. So I'm about, I think, 4 hours into demolishing this garden now. Got some food in the microwave because I'm hungry, and of course quite exhausted, but one thing that I am not running out of battery on are these Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classics. Honestly, these things are great. They're going to last me today, tomorrow, and the day after, because they've got up to 32 hours of battery life. And what's even better is if they were to run out of battery, they've got this really cool function where if I charge for 10 minutes, I get 90 minutes of playtime back, which is just absolutely fantastic. Honestly, I love these things. If you're stuck for a holiday gift this year, then these are such a win for everyone. You can use them while studying, working out, while walking, or even to drown out your family's conversations over Christmas dinner. The choice really is up to you. And right now, Raycon are offering up to 20% off over the holidays, so grab them while you can. Just click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/coffeehousecrimeyt to save on Raycon audio products site-wide. Just order by December the 15th to guarantee delivery by Christmas, because good products don't wait. As you can imagine, a lot of time, love, money, and energy goes into Coffeehouse Crime, both in what you see and what's behind the camera. And things like this upcoming studio only exists thanks to sponsors like Raycon, and of course all of you who support the channel through them. So thank you once again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Go to buyraycon.com/coffeehousecrimeyt to get up to 20% off this holiday season. And most importantly, thank you to you folks for supporting the creators you care about. And by the way, I can't wait to show you the rest of this in a few weeks' time. Anyway, let's get straight back to this video. Technology is crazy recently, and I have to admit I am kind of worried about where it's going. AI has been extremely disruptive to every industry out there, especially the creative scene. It's quite sad to say, but YouTube feels like it's slowly drifting away from its human touch, which to me is what YouTube is actually all about. In South Korea, phones are not merely just devices. They're lifelines, which are filled with communities, careers, and endless entertainment. Entire industries and trends seem to rise and fall within days here, and some of Korea's social media influencers are categorically massive. In short, South Korea is a country that is powered by tech, social media, money, and status, something which the Squid Game seems to capture quite perfectly. And sadly, even in the real world, sometimes those things all seem to combine into tragedy. And it's here in this hyper-connected world that we meet Yoon Ji-ah, a young woman and content creator who had found an audience of several 100,000 people. And little did she know that eventually, one day, one of those would kill her. So, who precisely was Yoon Ji-ah? Well, she was a vibrant young woman in her 20s, and the kind of creator who naturally loved to be on screen. Being honest with you here, I don't know much about Korean social media, but Ji-ah seemed to have that rare combination of charm and effortlessness that apparently always made people stop scrolling. Her comedy skits, day-in-the-life vlogs, and even her own fashion videos all painted the image of someone who was warm, funny, and real. And it wasn't long before hundreds of thousands of people began to tune in to her content for precisely that reason. In fact, at the time of her death, Ji-ah had well over 300,000 followers across TikTok and all other platforms. And it's clear in the months prior to her murder that her audience only seemed to keep growing. But back in the real world for just a moment, her friends claim that she was hardworking, ambitious, and had huge dreams. And that's because Ji-ah didn't see herself as just another influencer, but as an aspiring actress instead, and someone who was quietly trying to build a career that she hoped would one day take off from her social media. Now, perhaps one of the most magnetic parts of her presence was how she treated all of her viewers. Because after watching a few of her videos, it is clear that during her live streams, she would often chat to all of them as if she was actually talking to a close friend. She would also routinely thank her supporters, joke around, answer questions, and even share many vulnerable moments of her everyday life. In response, her fans would usually send her virtual gifts like donations, which are commonly found in Korean social media. This included things like colorful icons, stickers, animations, and even small financial donations. Most of these donations were not unusual, and they certainly were not alarming. They were merely just small tokens sent by those who liked to watch her content every day. However, as we all know too well in this industry, sometimes you only need one single person in a crowd of thousands to turn admiration into obsession. And hidden among her supporters was someone whose fixation was growing far beyond harmless admiration. As Ji-ah's popularity grew, so did her influence, and that's because in South Korea, live streaming seems to have its own ecosystem of power. And of course, with the way that the internet is becoming forever more integrated into society, it comes with its own fair share of fame too. You see, much like Western platforms like Kick and Twitch, viewers aren't necessarily just spectators. Some become donators, and others even investors. And on platforms like Africa TV, which is one that Yoon Ji-ah was huge on, fans can even buy lots of virtual gifts, such as the well-known star balloons. Now, in today's currency, a star balloon is not even worth $1, but of course, if they are sent in the hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands, they make a huge impact on the streamer. Now, of course, many people see this as currency, and there are others that see it as status or perhaps even just a display of care. But in the wrong hands, it can be seen as leverage. And unfortunately, that is something that GR would eventually experience. The platform's biggest spenders can often spend more than 100 million won, that being the equivalent to roughly 70,000 US dollars. And as you can probably guess, these spenders are usually looking for a little bit more than just a flashy icon beside their name. Instead, they are normally looking for influence and access, kind of like a seat of power close to their favorite streamer. And in the end, they sometimes become sponsors, friends, mentors, or maybe even something a little murkier. To be honest with you, it's a system where generosity and control seem to sit very uncomfortably close to each other. And this is often exploited by people for the most nefarious of reasons. And by now, you can likely guess that this is how GR would meet a man named Black Cat. Now, at first, this did seem to be a financial dream come true. Whenever GR went live, Black Cat was always there and ready to flood her screen with both gifts and money. And these were no small sums either. In fact, sometimes those numbers would be enough to make other streamers scream. You see, Black Cat was not merely supportive, but strategically supportive too. He was always present, always praising, and always throwing money towards her. But at the same time, always had great ideas to improve her streaming. To GR, this felt like much more than just luck. It felt like someone big had finally noticed her potential, and so, quite understandably, she ran with it. Several months later, and in late 2023, Black Cat would finally reveal himself to her. His real name was Mr. Choi, and he was a top-of-the-line successful CEO who owned an IT company. After this, he often talked to GR about business partnerships, investments, and even acting opportunities. He would also routinely compliment her talent and say that she had a very bright future. And, of course, for a young creator who was trying to break into this industry, well, his attention felt euphoric. And so, GR agreed to finally meet Black Cat because, well, she trusted him, and she believed that he was someone that she could allow into her personal life. However, as you likely have guessed by now, the man behind the name was not actually who he claimed to be. While GR saw Black Cat as a wealthy tech executive, the truth was actually extraordinarily different. And that's because Black Cat, who was legally known as Mr. Choi, was actually a man in his 50s who was drowning in financial ruin. I mean, not only was his home repossessed, but he also had loan sharks after him, and his debts were spiraling into oblivion. In fact, his online generosity towards GR, which totaled more than 100 million won, that being the equivalent of 68,000 US dollars or 52,000 pounds, did actually perfectly represent his behavior towards money. He seemed to have absolutely no concept or control over cash flow, and instead was merely just a compulsive spender. As Black Cat, he was powerful, admired, and possibly even feared. But as Choi, well, he was just poor and forgettable. And so, in the same way that GR chased her own dreams, he too chased the only thing that made him feel better, that being his power over a beautiful young woman. It is evident that GR became his escape, his fantasy, and his prized possession. And soon, his obsession would demand far more than just a few digital gifts. On the morning of September the 11th, 2024, Yoon GR headed out of her apartment to create new content. She made her way to Yeongjong Island, an area in Incheon which is well known for its ocean views. Outdoor live streams were something of a signature for GR, and so it was not unusual that she broadcasted live to her fans. Viewers watched as she wandered along the coastline, and nothing about her demeanor would suggest that anything was wrong. At approximately 3 PM that afternoon, her live stream then ended, finishing as normal as she thanked her audience before signing off. However, unknown to her and everyone else who was watching that live stream, it would sadly be the last time that the world would ever see her alive again, because not even 30 minutes later, she was gone. When GR didn't return home later that evening, her family immediately began to worry. Not only was she expected to be back for dinner, but nobody could actually reach her phone either. Friends also noticed that she had gone quiet, and her viewers also wondered why her usual updates had stopped. Something was clearly wrong, and that feeling seemed to spread quickly. GR had essentially vanished without a trace, and nobody knew where she had gone to or why. Sadly, nobody knew just yet that she had actually been abducted, and what they also didn't know was just how far she had been taken. The distance between where she was last seen alive and where her body was later found would turn out to be more than 3 hours away by car. Now, to be fair, the authorities in Itchen began to investigate quite rapidly. However, by then it was already too late, because later that evening, the authorities in Muju County received multiple reports of an unresponsive woman who had tragically been found on the side of a remote mountain. Rescue teams made the climb immediately, expecting to maybe find an injured hiker, but instead, what they found was her body. The scene was bleak. Yoon-GR lay in a secluded grassy clearing which was high above the winding mountain roads, a place that few people ever actually stumble upon. With all things considered, it was actually remarkable that she had been found on the same day she disappeared. But even still, nothing could be done to save her. Sadly, GR's body was covered with unmistakable signs of violence. This included bruising on her face and her arms, and a deep mark around her neck. An autopsy later confirmed that she had died by asphyxiation, and forensic teams determined that the mountainside was not the scene of the murder. It was merely just a dump site. By sunrise, the news of Yoon-GR's death was all over social media, and it even made national and international coverage too. Of course, with many headlines focusing on how this streamer had mysteriously been murdered. Fans were quite clearly devastated, and other content creators were both stunned and concerned for their own safety. And of course, everyone was asking two big questions. Who killed Yoon-GR? And why? Well, you can probably guess who already, and as investigators learned of the name Black Cat, it took them down this wild rabbit hole, one that was filled with anger, obsession, and deceit. As investigators began to piece things together, they initially started with Yoon-GR's final livestream, of course giving them a time and a place that she was last seen alive. Detectives retraced her final movements, scoured the area, and spoke to anyone who might have crossed paths with her. They were certain that whoever she had met, he or she likely wasn't a stranger. There was no chance that she would have gotten to a car with someone that she never knew, and when they eventually found surveillance footage, well, it only confirmed their beliefs. Now, unfortunately, Korea is very secretive when it comes to murder investigations, so we don't actually have the footage at hand. But what we do know is that security cameras near the live streaming site did capture GR in what looked like a tense conversation with an older man. We can see a screenshot of him bowing next to her, before then suddenly dropping to his knees. Again, this was a man who was much older than her, kneeling in desperation at the feet of this young streamer. His body language also seemed to be both frantic and panicked, not aggressive. And of course, all of this led to the question, what precisely was he begging her for? Whatever was going on, the two remained in contact because later on at 3:27 p.m, another camera captured just outside of her car the same man grabbing her before then pulling her back into her own car. Multiple witnesses then report seeing the car door being forced open and Yoon-GR being slammed shut inside, therefore leading the officers to believe that this was the exact moment that she was abducted. The identity of the kneeling man was basically confirmed to be Black Cat almost immediately, and so, no surprise, the police then publicly named him as her prime suspect. As you can imagine, that didn't go well with her fans, because many of them immediately recognized Black Cat. I mean, he was always gawking over her in her streams, and was essentially her moderator at this point too. With so much publicity inside her own streams, Black Cat did not have the luxury of remaining anonymous anymore, because at this point in time, literally tens of thousands of people already knew who he was through her. And so, as the authorities began their hunt for Black Cat, so did her own army of viewers. And let's just say that the deeper investigators and the internet dug, the more they all realized how horrifying his obsession would actually turn out to be. So, you're probably wondering what kind of relationship GR and Black Cat had, which is valid, but to better understand that, we must first talk about the kind of world they lived in. Some of you will already know where I'm going with this because I've talked about it in so many videos before, but the internet can be a very alarming place, especially when it comes to social media and parasocial relationships. GR openly shared her life online, and that was part of her appeal. She was vulnerable, honest, authentic, and transparent. And that meant that hundreds of thousands of people, including Black Cat, knew her extremely well. They would even create one-way impressions of her and even fantasize about her. And of course, the sad reality behind all of this is that Yoon GR didn't even know the existence of many of these people. However, here is where it gets a little bit messy in South Korea, because unlike Western platforms like Kick and Twitch, many of the biggest donators aren't merely just fans anymore, but actually become investors to the streamer. And with that investment status comes access, influence, and sometimes, in the wrong hands, a false sense of entitlement. And unfortunately, that is exactly where GR ended up with Black Cat. You see, Mr. Choi was not actually satisfied with just sending her gifts and cheering her on. Instead, he wanted control, and so he positioned himself as her mentor, tried to create a schedule for her, and even pushed her to follow orders. Now, this issue actually extends far past Yoon GR, but many top donators for these streamers in South Korea even ask these influencers for tracking apps, so for whatever reason, they can be monitored at all times. And unfortunately, it's believed that Black Cat even managed to achieve this with Yoon GR. By mid-2024, she finally had enough and told all of her friends that she wanted out. In all honesty, the donations didn't even matter anymore. She just wanted her freedom back. Now, that decision should have been simple, but for a man like Black Cat, losing her simply was not an option. And the moment that Yoon GR told him to back off, well, sadly, it was game over for her. As investigators closed in on Black Cat, the truth about him finally surfaced, and obviously, it was nothing like the image he had sold to GR. The fake wealthy CEO was a financially ruined man in his 50s, and not only were his debts enormous and his home repossessed, but the money that he had spent on Yoon GR's live streams had put him even further into the red. Essentially, he had gambled his entire future on her success. If GR were to actually become famous, then maybe he would ride the wave as her manager and business partner. But of course, that was fantasy and never likely going to happen. With well over 100 million won donated to her, his name was well known over all of her streams. And for a man who was failing everywhere else, that kind of attention was quite clearly intoxicating. At first, he had managed to charm GR into trusting him, pitching himself as some kind of mentor or sponsor and maybe even a business partner. But soon enough, as she pushed back, his mask would slip, and in the days before her murder, Black Cat's behavior collapsed. Multiple surveillance cameras have already shown him confronting GR, but the messages that he sent her were apparently even worse, with him groveling, pleading, and begging her to stay. Yoon GR made it quite clear that she wished to distance herself from him. But the thing is, if she left, then not only would his entire fantasy collapse, but all hope he had would die too. That final confrontation with Mr. Choi would cost GR her life. When she walked back towards her car on Yeongjong Island, she had no idea that Black Cat was actually already there waiting for her. As you may have guessed, he had tracked her down using her livestream, which, of course, is something that we've already experienced here on Coffeehouse Crime time and time again. As soon as he caught sight of GR, Mr. Choi intercepted her. The two argued, almost certainly about her decision to cut ties with him, and with GR standing firm, that is when he dropped to his knees and begged her to stay. But when she refused to give in, that is when he stopped pleading and his rage took over instead. As she turned away, Black Cat lunged towards her. He grabbed her, forced her into her car, and then sped off with her held captive. Somewhere during that drive, things would then turn fatal. Evidence later showed that GR was horrifically beaten, with bruises all over her face and body. Most of the violence seemed to happen inside her own car. And then, in that confined space, she was strangled. Whether it was with his hands or a ligature, we don't quite know, but what we do know is that this lasted for several minutes, which was enough time for him to back down and stop. But of course, this was personal. Black Cat had many moments to stop if he wished to do so, but with every waking second, he made the conscious decision to carry on, and moments later, she was gone. Investigators would later find out that Black Cat had even brought a large suitcase with him, suggesting that this murder was actually premeditated. As for disposing her body, Muju County is quiet, rural, and the kind of place that you mostly visit for hiking or skiing, and so, realistically, this was the perfect place to hide a body. It was somewhere along that drive that he stuffed her body into a large suitcase to avoid being spotted. He then placed it in the back of the car and continued onwards. The trip would take more than 3 hours in total, allowing plenty of time for panic, regret, or even fear to kick in. But Black Cat had a plan, and in an effort to confuse investigators, he would even make 8 separate stops along the way, pulling over in towns, changing direction, and even pausing along highways. Anything to confuse the timeline and the investigators. You see, Mr. Choi thought that he was outsmarting the system, when in reality, all he was doing was making himself look even more suspicious. Anyway, by nightfall, he reached a secluded part of the mountain, and then, while under the cover of darkness, he dragged his suitcase from the road, opened it, and then dumped her body into the grassy clearing. Not that any of this would actually matter, because, of course, only a few hours later, her body was found. Mr. Choi likely believed that this lonely patch of wilderness would probably hide what he had done. But thankfully, he was wrong. While he was still on the road back home, Gia's family had already reported her missing. Police even had the surveillance footage of her abduction right under their noses. And before he even reached his front door, he was declared to be a suspect. By the time her body was found, officers were already tracking Black Cat's movements, and only 12 hours later, he was found. Now, at first, he actually lied about the murder and claimed that, after arguing, the two then allegedly went their separate ways. But of course, police officers knew this was baloney. It's actually amazing how much information they had against this guy within 24 hours, because not only did they have hours of surveillance footage against this guy, but not one, but 8 separate witnesses placing him and Yoon Ji-ah in the same car. And so, when officers told him this, he quite literally collapsed and confessed on the spot. And then came even more grim discoveries, because after officers started digging into his criminal profile, they realized that Mr. Choi has a long history of violence. In fact, not even 1 year prior to Yoon Ji-ah's death, Mr. Choi was on trial for assaulting and abducting yet another female streamer. So this wasn't a one-off or a freak accident, this was quite literally a pattern. The public were furious to learn that, despite his previous conviction, he was free to do the same thing yet again only 1 year later. The system had failed Yoon Ji-ah on a cataclysmic level, and sadly, she had to pay the full price for it. South Korea was stunned by his confession. News outlets called him the Black Cat Killer, and a man who pretended to be Ji-ah's guardian angel while slowly tightening the noose around her life. The public's anger was immediate too. They all saw a young woman who was chasing her dreams that had been betrayed by a man that she and the rest of her community thought was safe. So, it is no surprise to learn that prosecutors announced that they would pursue the harshest sentence possible. And this tragedy did not end in the courtroom either. It would also spark another conversation around social media and the risk that streamers and influencers alike take to speak on their own platforms. In fact, many other Korean streamers started sharing their own stories of obsessive fans and top donors who all often seemed to push boundaries. And many more admitted that they had brushed off plenty of warnings before too. Even American streamer Asmongold Gold issued his own blunt warning on X, saying, if someone randomly gives you a ton of money, block them. The kinds of people who donate 50k to a girl online, they're not stable. Now, obviously, his words would hit a nerve for a few people, but they are also kind of true, and this case proves it. In South Korea, calls for reform grew louder. Many viewers demanded better protections for creators, faster police response to stalking, stricter monitoring of massive donations, and new digital safety laws that would protect all creators alike. They would even ask for an increase in mental health resources for streamers who are dealing with obsessive viewers. But in my opinion, I think they missed something here. What I think they should also provide is mental health resources for anyone who donates large amounts of money, because the truth is, they too likely need help. Moving to the legal proceedings of this case, by late 2025, Mr. Choi stood in court to face a, quite bluntly, overwhelming amount of evidence. Behind that, he also faced a nation that was united in both disgust and outrage. The prosecution sought life in prison, and there was very little sympathy outside of his defense team. He became known as, quote, an obsessive lunatic, and was the subject of parasocial relationships and exploitation. At the time of recording this, Black Cat has not yet been found guilty, though it is kind of obvious that this is how it will end. I mean, he has already admitted his responsibility. However, South Korea moves slowly with this kind of thing, and so his trial is still ongoing. But once that verdict lands, it is expected to be both severe and long-term. For now though, we are still waiting for an end. Speaking of endings, we should remember Yoon Ji-ah as a bright and creative person who was full of ambition. And her story is a painful lesson that the greatest danger to public figures is not always coming from hate. Sometimes, it is coming from love that has been twisted into obsession. Now, it is true that the legacy that she leaves behind might be a wake-up call for creators, fans, and general live streaming platforms. Though, if I'm honest with you, I doubt it, because platforms like Twitch and Kick really don't care. However, this is a reminder to all of us with large and small followings alike that we really must exercise caution. Because at the end of the day, we don't know who is behind that screen. And let's be honest, 90% of the time, their intentions aren't good. So, I guess we'll see what happens in this case and what happens to Black Cat. Hopefully he's put behind bars for life, and knowing South Korea, it likely will end up that way. But what are your thoughts here? Anyway folks, that's pretty much everything on this case as we stand today. Of course, with any more information that comes out, I'll be sure to leave it below in a pinned comment. But until then, I suppose that's the end of this story. Thank you so much for watching though, I really do appreciate you being here. And of course, thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Go to buyraycon.com/coffeehousecrimeyt to get up to 20% off this holiday season. If you want to follow me on social media, go to Coffeehouse Crime on Instagram or Facebook. And of course, you can also find me on Spotify now. I really appreciate you giving me a follow over there too. Hey Nero, your fans want to say hi. Over here. There are hundreds of thousands of people that want to say hi to you. His head is pretty empty. Anyway folks, that's basically it from me today, but as always, I'll see you again next week for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourselves and of course each other. And stay curious out there. Thank you, and goodbye.